Hey volunteers, I'm Kira Sobers, Digital Media Coordinator here at SI Archives.
And I'm Allison Redford-Gerber, a Preservation Coordinator, also at Smithsonian Institution Archives.
And we are here to answer any questions you have about AV preservation.
Hopefully you all saw our video from last week where Kira and I went through some of the challenges of AV preservation. We had a couple questions come up regarding that video, and then if you have any questions now, please feel free to ask them and we will be willing to answer.
Feel free to post your questions in the comments or on Twitter using the hashtag TCSound.
So until we get some questions in, do you want to go over some fun formats that you currently have in the lab?
Sure. So as we mentioned last time, there's a variety of different formats that constitute audiovisual materials. And we've got a handful of those here today to show you, sort of see what it is that we're working with. And these are all materials that exist in SI Archives collections. Using the hashtag TCSound. TCSound. Okay, so the first one is 1/4-inch audio tape, which is some of the material that's going to be coming up on the Transcription Center in the Sound Transcription Project. So this is an example of a 1/4-inch audio tape. This particular one is a 7-inch reel, and as you can see, it's got a beautiful tape pack, all nice and smooth in there. That's what we want, as opposed to this one, which is another 1/4-inch reel, and is falling out of the box even. So this is a 5-inch reel. It's a little bit smaller, and you can see it's not quite in as good of preservation. It's not quite as good of a condition. This one we're still working with.
Now, Kira, I noticed that there is white tape on the end of this one, yes, and there is not on the other reel. What is that?
That is a good observation, Allison. So the white tape here, something that we use for not only 1/4-inch material, but also for motion picture film, is what we call leader. And so this is just a basic polyester tape, or polyester material that is used to add on to the end of the 1/4-inch audio tape itself. So it has a couple different purposes. The first one is to protect the outermost layers of the recording itself, because that way that's not exposed. You've got your leader exposed instead. The second one is so that when you are digitizing these materials, you are getting full end-to-end transfer, the entire tape, as opposed to just whatever might happen to fall off the end of the tape head as it's coming off the reel.
You can also, if you are cataloging all of your things to item level and they each have an individual name, you can write that name on the end of the leader, and that really helps in case your reel becomes dissociated from your box, that you will still know what this is. At the archives, we also make these very pretty labels for our boxes that have all of our metadata on them, but it's also important to mark the reel itself.
That actually takes us into a really good question that we just got from a volunteer. What kind of metadata do you collect on audio?
That is a great question. So for our audio materials, a lot of times the metadata is collected as it's being digitized, especially because with 1/4-inch, boxes aren't very well documented. As you can see with this one here, the only thing that's on here is the label. I'm not sure if you can see that very well. And so that's some great title information as to where this interview is from, but there's no information on here as far as running time or as far as length. So some of the things that we're populating with our own labels is that we have on here not only the collection that it's part of and the box, but then also the title of the audio recording. Who it was created by. This particular set of material is lectures from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. And then we're also recording the date that the audio recording was made, the duration, which this tape hasn't been digitized, so we don't have the duration in here yet. And then this part right here, which is really important. This is all the playback information. So 1/4-inch audio tapes can be played at a number of different speeds, and that's important for knowing how to digitize them, and also like what equipment you need to digitize them on, because different 1/4-inch decks will digitize at different speeds. This one in particular is 3.75 IPS, which is inches per second, and then half track and monaural. And what that means is that there is 2 tracks that can be recorded on this particular one, and then only the top one has any audio content on it, making it half track. It's not stereo because there's nothing on the second one, and it's only running in one direction on the top half.
So in terms of metadata, how will volunteer transcriptions of some of the digitized audio content and later video later this year, how will that help to enrich metadata or information that we know about collections?
So for a lot of these recordings, the only information that we have once they've been digitized is that title information. Any title that was provided on the box or that we were able to glean from the first 5 seconds or so of the tape, we don't have a lot of time to be able to digitize or to be able to listen to the full recording to do really in-depth cataloging. And so what the transcription process will help with the volunteers is that it will allow us to create more robust descriptions to be able to enhance those catalog records. So instead of just knowing that this is a lecture from the Woodrow Wilson Center, we'll be able to know who it is, what they talked about, what kind of discussions were had. Was it a back and forth format, or was it just simply like a straight lecture with no Q&A, things like that. That'll all be able to come out of the transcription.
Well, and sometimes the box that the reels are in, you think that you know what the content of the tape is, and then once you start playing it back, it is not at all what that is. And also, some of these recordings, a lot of the recordings were recorded by quote-unquote amateurs and weren't really standardized. And so there could be multiple programs or multiple content on one reel, and we wouldn't really be able to tell that until it's digitized. There's no way to tell that.
Yeah, and some of the programs that the Smithsonian Archives has on TC Sound right now are from the Smithsonian Galaxy radio program, and those shows were usually comprised of at least 3 mini episodes and mini topics inside of them. And again, the only information that we have right now for those mini topics is the title of whatever they determined that topic was going to be called, but we don't have any additional information recorded for those, such as who it was, like, and any more in-depth information on what they discussed. So that's some really good information that's going to be coming out of the transcriptions.
Another question we've got is that once the AV material has been digitized, where is the information stored, and what challenges do you see with data storage?
So all of our digital files go into a centrally managed Smithsonian digital asset management system. The files themselves get stored up there in the dams and are preserved by our central IT department sort of in perpetuity. And that's just the actual physical data file storage portion. All of the metadata gets cataloged separately and maintained separately in our collection management system. And the two are in the process of being linked so that all of the information that we're putting into our collection management system will be added into the dams records as well, these materials. Do you want to talk about data storage issues?
So data storage issues. So the Smithsonian has a pretty robust system in place for digital preservation. And when we talk about digital preservation, we mean the longevity of the files. And so like Kira was talking about, we have the dams in place that has some replicability to it. And so we have these files stored at lots of different places. So if something happens to one, we have several of those files that are backed up elsewhere. However, people often forget that when we have data storage and these things are stored in the cloud and they don't feel really tangible, that they're just stored in the ether, and that's not actually true. There are data centers that exist all around the world that take up a lot of energy, and they are physical places with physical things, and so there is quite an environmental impact to them, and so we need to be conscious of how much we are storing because that can have long-term repercussions. And so even though we have this replicability, we just need to be smart. It is how we're doing it because digital storage costs money and it costs resources as well.
Awesome. So I know that we've talked a lot about AV preservation challenges, and one of those being storage, but a number of others that you can see on the video that we recorded last week. What would you say, obviously we face a lot of challenges here at the Smithsonian, but we have a lot of resources, even though we still need more. What would you say to somebody who's looking to preserve their own family's audiovisual collections? How should they store them? How should they, in a digital sense or in a physical sense?
Well, I can start with the physical sense, and I will let Kira take over with the digital sense. And so in the physical sense, there are a couple of things that you can do at home to extend the lifespan of your AV assets. Well, some formats will degrade quicker than others, and you probably want to prioritize those for digitization. There are some formats that are pretty robust if they're taken care of over time. Film typically tends to be a little bit more robust than any of your magnetic media formats, such as like VHS tapes or Betacams, Betamax, all of those. But so some things that you can do at home, everybody loves to store their stuff in a basement, right? Because nobody ever goes in a basement and it's easy storage. But your basement is actually pretty bad for your AV materials in the sense that it's usually pretty high in humidity. If you don't have a dehumidifier running in your basement, sometimes the humidity, I'm sure, can run between like 80 and 90%. It gets pretty high, and that's pretty detrimental to the physical nature of your audiovisual assets. And so you'll want to store your things in cool temperatures, low humidity, dark spaces. So light can also affect these things. So I usually tell people to look for a place that's interior in your home, so away from exterior walls, because those tend to fluctuate with temperature, humidity, and there are windows that let in light. And so you want to store these in an interior room that's pretty stable in temperature and humidity. As far as rehousing your materials, you want to look for things that are not cardboard. So a lot of things are stored in really poor quality board. You know, that brown paper that just like starts to fall apart after 5 or 10 years. You'll want to look for some materials that are acid free and some that are even buffered, which just means that they have been impregnated with a calcium carbonate buffer. And so those help to neutralize any acids that may be coming off your materials. And that'll help extend their life as well. So you want to get rid of those cardboard boxes, but make sure you write down anything that is on the box that could tell you something about the content. You don't want to throw away anything original that has information on it. And then store them in a better spot than your basement.
And as far as digital preservation of these materials, there are a number of companies out there that will digitize your materials for you for a fee, of course. The most important thing to keep in mind with digital preservation of your AV materials is that you want a format that is either going to be lossless compressed. So we here at the Smithsonian use a couple of different varieties of like archival video formats. For video in particular, we're using either Motion JPEG 2000 in an MXF wrapper, which has lossless compression, so you can open it and close it a million times, and it's going to be exactly the same file every time. And there's also an open source format that's out there that's called FFV1. Came out of the Bay Area Video Coalition, had a big coding project that they did. It's supported by FFmpeg and has a huge AV archival community support behind it. And that's another like lossless compression format. And so those are good for sort of long-term preservation of your video files. You want to avoid getting your video files back on DVDs or as MPEGs, MPEG 2s, MPEG 4s. Those are great as like access files for you to be able to share with your family and your friends, be able to watch them, for years on end. But eventually, depending on how many times you've watched those videos, they're not gonna be around. Those formats are both not only very proprietary, but also very lossless. There's a really cool yet disturbing video on YouTube about what happens when you open an MPEG 4 file too many times. And basically you go from having a video that's clear, that's audible, to a lot of like green and blue and pink pixels and very warbled sound that doesn't sound like anything. So in order to preserve those videos, you want to look for a more robust digital preservation format. For audio, everything that we are digitizing is preserved as a broadcast wave format, and then we have MP3 access files. And the broadcast waves aren't usually too terribly large. It's bigger than your standard MP3 because it is a preservation file, but they're also good for just standard listening as well, if that's what you choose to do.
We got a follow-up question to the metadata question. Is there any different metadata you'd recommend for native digital files, such as files that were originally recorded in MP3 or WAV formats?
So with digital files, there are both codecs and containers that make up that digital file. So like I was saying with the video files, we have an Motion JPEG 2000 in an MXF wrapper. So like the Motion JPEG 2000 is our codec and the MXF is our container. And so it's the same thing with WAV files and MP3s. You want to note what was, if you can, note what was used to make those files, because there are a lot of proprietary codecs out there that make it so that even though something looks like a regular MP3 file and should therefore be standard across the board, it has some sort of weird codec in it that can't be transcoded by typical software or won't be able to be transcoded by typical software in the future. And so noting sort of that origination path, like what was used to originally record the video or audio material, and then any additional information you have as far as when, where, time, like length of time, stuff like that is all important and will all help with your digital preservation of those files later on.
Another question. So in your intro video, you discussed having problems finding the equipment and the people with the knowledge to use the equipment to preserve some older formats of AV material. Do you know of any training programs to get new people trained on old technology? Should this be a priority?
It should absolutely be a priority. And no, I personally do not know of any specifically for deck maintenance. I know that there are some good communities of people that can probably work on getting anyone who's interested in touch with the right people. For audio material, there's the Association of Recorded Sound Collections. They, in addition to having a good archivist space, they have a really good sort of technician space as well. And so can probably be a pretty good resource for finding training programs related to like learning about some of the technical maintenance of these things. And then for moving images, there's the Association of Moving Image Archivists that has a number of like technicians that are part of the group as well, and again can sort of help point people in the right direction of training programs and stuff specifically for technical issues.
Awesome. So that kind of leads into another question that we've gotten a couple of different times before this video, since our last video. For anybody who's interested in getting into audiovisual archival work or preservation work with archival materials, what do you guys suggest in terms of that career path?
So I think that there are a lot of different ways that you can get to preservation. It's such a broad topic and encompasses so many different things. My personal background is in conservation, and then I got my master's in museum studies. A lot of my training has been on the job though, here at the archives. This was the first time I had worked with an archives, and their collections are very unique. I also didn't know anything about audiovisual preservation when I started here, and so I had to learn very fast. But I think that there are a lot of different paths that you can take to get here. You can come the conservation route, museum studies, all of those programs can help you prepare you for a career in preservation. If you're specifically looking at audiovisual preservation, there are several master's programs that exist out there that prepare you for the audiovisual digital preservation side of things. And so you can go that route as well. I know people who've come from public history backgrounds and eventually make their way to preservation. So there is no one good path to get there. And I encourage anybody to, if you're interested in it, start looking for internships. There are lots of online resources available regarding the different facets of preservation that you can just start educating yourself as far as that goes.
And both of the organizations that I talked about as far as being able to point you in the direction of technical trainings also have really good education committees that are continuously posting resources and opportunities for education in those fields as well. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have time for today. Thank you all volunteers for listening. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to either post them in the comments or reach out on Twitter via TC Sound, and we will get a response back to you on this.
Thanks, everybody.